An image is one of the most sneakily powerful things that an author can put into their work, not dialogue. You're not going to carry a character with you, but an image, something that our reader sees in their mind's eye, is deceptively powerful because it allows the reader to take that work with them in its entirety through the power of an image. It is really the root of mimetic capture. And guys, we have an article today that I want to talk about from LitHub, but I want to start here. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for a video which will appear in two different playlists here on the channel. Number one being the Friday Reads playlist, where we take a look at different ideas from the world of literature, and we try to take a step back and analyze them rather than just a piece of work. And number two being the Writing Advice playlist here on the channel. Let's start with a definition from literarydevices.net of imagery. Imagery is a literary device that refers to the use of figurative language to evoke a sensory experience or create a picture with words for a reader. By utilizing effective descriptive language and figures of speech, writers appeal to a reader's sense of sight, taste, smell, touch, and sound, as well as internal emotion and feelings. Therefore, imagery is not limited to visual representations or mental images, but also includes physical sensations and internal emotions. I, however, would argue that while this is true, it is the literal image. Well, I guess it's not literal because it is in your mind's eye, it is through words, but it is the image as a picture which is most powerful. In an article titled On Beauty and Its Opposite, Writing Toward Aesthetic Force, Matthew Clark Davison and Alice LaPlante on the importance of the singular image from LitHub. We begin with this paragraph. True beauty in literature isn't ornamental. It isn't lyrical flourish on the surface of pain or a reward for rendering trauma with the right degree of humility. It's what Sarah Lewis in The Rise calls aesthetic force, a quality that stuns, alters, destabilizes, and lodges itself in our memory not because it comforts us, but because it insists that we see something differently than before. In writing, as in life, the beautiful often travels with its opposite. Now, for the first part there, it's not about lyrical flourish. It isn't ornamental. I think the best way to conceptualize this is to remember always Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway's prose was sparse, yes, but he is one of the most quotable authors of American literature and maybe the most distinctive American voice since Mark Twain. But it's not because of lyrical flourish. It's not because of its ornamentality. It is because what he does with his language is something so precise that you are able to see whatever it is that he is telling you about. Maybe with that second point there, in writing as in life, the beautiful often travels with its opposite. That beauty and its opposite contrast, beauty and the ugly, the beauty and the terrifying, whatever it is that is the opposite of beauty, that is what allows the contrast, right? Without light, there's no dark, right? All of these things that we've heard 1,000 times before. But I think that this is also sort of one of the things that makes Stephen King's writing last so long for his readers. If you watch the Stephen King movies, there are always scenes that are particularly compelling. And those scenes are almost always, to my experience, the most memorable scenes stripped straight from the page. What Stephen King is doing with something simple and something terrifying on the page is explicit, and that makes it translate very well to film. For example, the scene in the original It TV series, I guess it was, where Tim Curry's Pennywise is in the sewer grate, and Georgie walks past, and Pennywise has the toy boat, and Pennywise has the balloon. All that's straight from the pages of the novel itself. It works so well because the image is so clean. The article continues in our classes in our classes and in our forthcoming book from W. Norton, The Lab: Experiments in Writing Across Genre. We've noticed students eager to portray darkness, pain, trauma, disillusionment, thinking that to be serious is to be bleak. This is a problem, I believe, with academia, but it isn't just student writers. Sullen attitudes have been the norm for literary fiction for a few generations now. And I think that it is sad that things have gotten that way. And I think it's because we are taught too close to the text. I love close readings as much as the next literary fanatic, and if you've been on the channel for any period of time, you know that as well. But I think that, for example, in As I Lay Dying, these things on the page are very dark. This is a very dark story. But if we take a couple steps back from the page itself, we retreat a couple steps, we see how ridiculous the entire thing is. We see how crazy it is. We see the almost idiotic nature of this family's misfortune. And there's humor in that. It is a dark humor, but it is humor. A little bit further in this article, Lisa Bellamy's poem Thank You for the Tulips, highlighted as an example in The Lab, does just that. The poem's speaker, a mother, receives flowers from her adult daughter. The occasion is seemingly benign, but Bellamy uses this gentle gesture to open a torrent of confession. I am sorry I was drunk when you were a kid. I am sorry you fell out of your stroller when you were a toddler because I was hungover and forgot to buckle you in. The tulips, a conventionally beautiful image, anchor the poem, but the force comes from the interplay of image and admission. The speaker's regret is so palatable that the reader, rather than recoiling, leans in. Beauty here isn't a mask, it's a lens. The image the poet uses, iridescent tulips, the daughter's flecked eyes, the hipster vegan donuts, all emerge in relief against failures of care and memory. By the time the poem ends, you were a delicious baby, readers feel something like grace. It's a weird line to feel grace over, but hey, whatever. Not because the speaker is redeemed, but because we've been invited into the complexity of her love and guilt without being told what to think. Another good example of this, I think, is My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Rothke. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing wasn't easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Now, this is a very, very good example of image. This is a very, very good example of the beautiful right there with the ugly. This is a very, very good example of all the things that we've been reading about so far. The whiskey on your breath. Anyone who has smelled whiskey breath knows it's not a pleasant smell. Where is it? The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. My right ear scraped a buckle. All of these things, you beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt. These things are all very, very ugly, but they are happening in a beautiful image until you unwrap that image and realize that probably what's going on here isn't exactly a waltz. It's probably something closer to child abuse. So I think that is so. I've talked about this poem several times on the channel, but I don't have to go into it here. If you read between the lines here, maybe it's not a dance that we're reading about. Maybe it is child abuse. So that is something very, very ugly that we are reading there. But it is painted in a way that would give us a beautiful image if we take the words halfway between literal and figurative, right? This is an example of how we might think of aesthetic force as a generative tool in our creative writing. It's not about what the piece claims, but what it does. And it's something that often occurs not in moments of resolution, but in the tension between what's being shown and what's being withheld. My favorite example of this is Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke. And the whores and the bartenders and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? Do you want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know you're in there, so don't be sad. Then I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die, and we sleep together like that, with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a man weep. But I don't weep. Do you? What's not told to us here is what is lied about to us here, but I don't weep. It seems that explicitly, our speaker does weep because that bluebird, that's him too. So it's not about what the piece claims, but what it does. The piece is lying to us. He's lying to us the same way that he's lying to himself because he has to remain the big tough guy at the end of the day. That is very important to the speaker in this poem. The little bit later in the article, we get this. That's what happened when an Apollo 8 astronaut turned his camera back toward Earth and captured Earthrise. It wasn't just a technical marvel. The photo of the blue sphere awed those who saw it, moved them beyond the thinking mind, and stunned them with its floating blue display of our planet's glory and fragility. Historians say the image helped launch the first Earth Day. I think a lot of writers have forgotten how to use an image at all. I read a novel a few years ago, which was Loner or Loser or something like that. I can't remember exactly. It was utterly uncompelling. And unfulfilling. At the end of the novel, it was just schlock. I didn't feel anything. I didn't whatever it was attempting to do, in my opinion, it didn't do any of it. And I realized that there were no symbols and there were no images that I could think of through that entire novel. Cardboard characters and Mean Girls lunch table plots are bad enough, but you can at least give me something to look at along the way. Because if you give me an image, a talented reader, an experienced reader, an interested reader, any of those three, if you give a reader that image, he gets to fill in what it means, right? He or she gets to decide what that image means, if that image is important. And oftentimes, if a reader is engaged, they will imbue that image with some type of meaning. And all of a sudden, surprise, here's a gift. Your writing is better because you provided an image and the reader did the rest of the work. But the writer of that novel was so lazy, perhaps, um, so bad of a writer, that he didn't even do that. The power of the image through words to put a reader into another frame rate, right? Because what you're doing with an image, if it's a static image, and you can build a static image into an image, is you're taking them out of the frame rate in which they're thinking, and boom, one clean frame sticks with them. They take it with them. And then they are imbuing that image with power, with meaning, ever the longer. And they don't have to be nice. An image does not have to be nice. Think of the opening scene of Fight Club. The image we get there is the narrator sitting in a chair and Tyler Durden has a gun in his mouth. That is an image. It's where we start the novel, and we know from there we're going someplace very, very different than most of the things we have read. Forward in the article, we often ask our students to go small, focus on an image, a gesture, a line of dialogue, and let it bloom in meaning rather than pin it down. In one anonymous student piece, an arm severed in a school shooting is described as the pink of a cherry blossom, a flower just starting to unfurl. The horror is obvious, the beauty is unsettling, and that's the point. I think that's a little melodramatic, but who am I to judge? In fact, I think that the smaller the subject of the image, the bigger the reader gets to daydream and implicate. So the smaller the subject, the easier the outcome would have. The smaller the subject. So in literature, what we're doing is we're giving a an image, we're giving a scene. The image is part of the scene, right? That scene has implications for the story. The smaller the image we have, the easier the implications would have been different. The easier the outcomes would have been different. So, for example, we have someone riding their bike on the side of the road. When a moth hits him in the eye, he falls into traffic, boom, he's dead. Boom, 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 there's a 4-car pileup. Then we show that moth land on a fence post, a nearby fence post. That moth is just kicking it on the fence post. Very small image. But then we have to think back. That moth is what caused this guy's death, what caused 4-car pileup. Had that moth not been in that place at that moment, everything could have been easier. Well, if everything could have been easier, everything could have been pleased as punch and done with daisies, then all of a sudden the entirety of these people's lives is impacted by one moth. Are we but blades of grass thrown into a careless wind? It seems so. I guess I'm a nihilist. What's the point of life? And that all springs out from one little moth flying into some guy's eye. And then the last thing I want to talk about from this article happens here. Our advice to writers: find what dazzles you and describe it, even if, especially if, it also frightens or disgusts you. Make the image clear. Resist easy resolution. And don't underestimate the power of beauty, not as decoration, but as revelation. So here's a weird thing. Especially if it also frightens or disgusts you. But earlier in the article, we wanted to say that, hey, it doesn't have to be nasty stuff. What was that? It was maybe the second paragraph in this. Students are eager to portray darkness, pain, trauma, and disillusionment, thinking it to be that to be serious is to be bleak. It doesn't have to be serious to be bleak. It doesn't have to have darkness, pain, trauma, or disillusionment. Hey, by the way, go write about stuff, especially if it frightens or disgusts you. So that's the kind of, I think that is I think that's part of the reason I blamed academia earlier, right? For the fact that so much writing is sullen. I think this is part of the reason why, right? Because the advice you get is, hey, if it scares you, write about it. But we're never real clear. Scaring you doesn't have to mean it's serial killers or death, right? There's lots of things that can scare you, and they are perfectly reasonable things to write about. And if you want more on that, look up Tom Spanbauer. Tom Spanbauer is an absolutely wonderful novelist, and he writes about things that scare him, but they don't have to be serial killers and whatnot, right? But anyway, guys, that is what I wanted to say for this video, talking about images, etc., and how powerful they can be in writing. And I want you to think about the most recently published book that you read, and whether or not there were any strong images in it. That's one of the things I talked about Stephen King, right? I read two of the recent Stephen King books, Holly and Fairy Tale. No good images. No good images in them. And I railed against Stephen King's recent track run in both of those read-alongs on the channel because there's nothing really there for us. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literary goodness in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.